Rose died just shortly after giving birth to my mother, and she was only 25 years old. This was a tragedy that was never spoken about directly, but it hung over us. I couldn't bear to be without her, but I couldn't stand being with her. It's helped me make peace with the past, really.
Hello, and welcome to A Normal Family, a podcast collecting and retelling true family stories with lessons for us all. This week, I spoke to Ruth. Ruth is a Bruce Springsteen fan and the author of a book called Where Are the Grown-Ups? She started writing the book to deal with the grief of having lost her mother, but ended up going back through 3 generations of her family to the East End of London, uncovering family secrets and understanding more about the events that shaped her mother and their own complicated relationship.
I think I couldn't bear to be without her, but I couldn't stand being with her. I discovered that there was something fundamental missing in my mother's emotional life, and I think it affected all her adult relationships and her relationship with me. I think she needed mothering, and so did I, actually. Our growing up, in front of our children, absolutely, and working it all out in front of them. You won't always be 100% successful, but most of the time you'll be good enough. You really will.
Please, if you don't already, then do subscribe to our channel and like this video to see more like it. Let's get started. So,
Hello.
welcome Ruth to A Normal Family. How are you this morning?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Great. I like to start by asking my guests where in the world they're calling it from.
Well, I'm in rural Essex, between Colchester and Sudbury, on the Essex-Suffolk border. And the
Lovely.
sun is shining, and it's not bad.
Good, good. A sunny morning. I love it. I'm in Oakham in Rutland, back in my hometown, which is nice. Ruth, we were introduced via my old career coach, Cindy, who is a friend that you found through Bruce Springsteen, through the boss.
Yes, I find the best people through Bruce Springsteen.
How many times have you seen him?
Something like 36 times, which
Wow.
I'm sure Cindy can beat that 3 times over. But it's not the number of shows, as we say.
And she introduced us because you had written a book called Where Are the Grown-Ups?
Correct.
And she rightly thought that there were some great themes for the Normal Family Project. Can you just start by summarizing what you wrote about?
So it's a true story about real people and real events. And it covers parent and child relationships through 3 generations of my mother's family. It's about me, and it's about my mother, Sylvia, and the grandmother I didn't know, whose name was Rose. Rose died just shortly after giving birth to my mother, and she was only 25 years old. And this was a tragedy that was never spoken about directly, but it hung over us. And really, I wrote the book because I wanted to explore the impact of Rose's death on the relationship that I had with my mother. I think we all know, don't we, that programs like Who Do You Think You Are show us that finding out about those natural connections that we have to the people that came before us are really important, because they tell us more about ourselves. So one of the things
Absolutely.
I was trying to explore in the book was what happens when those natural connections are interrupted and there's a blank in your story that can never be filled. And I thought that was something I really needed to do for myself.
Well, let's start there then with your mother, because it was her death that prompted you to start writing or researching this initially.
Yeah.
Can you paint a picture of what it was like growing up with her?
Well, where do I start? I grew up in North London in the 1960s and 70s, and we weren't a rich family, but we were comfortable. Both my parents came from very different social backgrounds. And of course, as a child, I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate it in those terms. But we used to make weekly visits to each side of the family. And I noticed a lot of things about adult behavior, and I enjoyed listening to adult conversation and making my own mind up. And I noticed that when we went to my mother's side of the family, those people spoke in a different way and they talked about different things. Jack and Becky had adopted my mother as a tiny baby because her mother had died. We knew all about that. And we knew also that her father was alive, but we didn't talk to him. And as a child, you don't ask why, you just know. So we used to drive to this Victorian terraced house in Stoke Newington, which is highly gentrified now, but in the 1960s 1960s and 70s, it definitely wasn't. Jack and Becky lived in only part of this house, and they shared it with Becky's younger sister, Clara. And we would then drive to Bloomsbury, to a very smart block of flats in near Tavistock Square, Bloomsbury.
Yeah.
And there we would see my father's mother, my grandma, and his elder brother, my uncle. And these people were very formal, much more formal. There was no hugging and kissing. My grandma was kind, but not particularly warm. They used to be business owners on the other side of the family.
Did they interact with one another differently?
Well, they did. And one thing I did notice is that my mother never seemed very comfortable in their company. She always seemed
Okay.
quite stiff and on edge. Whereas in the Stoke Newington house, there was much more affection. I know my mother found these encounters with her in-laws quite taxing, because she was obsessive about her appearance, and getting ready for these outings took a long time. She was very particular about her clothes and and her hair and what she was wearing. Living at home as a child with my mother, she was an obsessive cleaner, and
Okay.
cleaning, it was the most important thing in her life. And it made life at home quite oppressive. How my mother completed her routines would dictate her mood. What she couldn't cope with was spontaneous, unpredictable behavior. For example, the kitchen cupboards were her domain. And as a child, I could not open a kitchen cupboard. She arranged the tins and the packets in a particular way. And if that order was disrupted, she could be in a bad mood or even a fury for days.
I
And
can understand why
I
you call it oppressive.
it was very oppressive. What made her happy was if there was absolutely no evidence that we lived in our house. That's the state that she liked to live
Yeah.
in, kind
Yeah.
of show home.
So how was that
Yeah.
as a young girl, as a child? What did that do to you to childhood?
I couldn't say I felt this was normal, because when I went to my friend's house, this wasn't remotely how anyone else lived, but it was normal in my house. So I accepted that that was the rules in my house. And
Mhm.
other people's houses, it was different, and it was quite exciting because you could do different things. But of course, I did not understand then that this was a symptom of my mother's unhappiness and lack of confidence in herself. I've only come to understand that much later on.
You talked
So,
about going to your friend's house and seeing different ways that families live. I'm curious about the image that families present to the world. If I was a neighbor of your families, what would I have observed?
well, I think my mother was quite a curiosity to the lady next door.
Okay.
I think she was quite a fascinating character to other women around. My mother didn't have close female friends. I think she was quite intimidating to other women.
All right.
And as I grew older and as a teenager, I began to take in the kind of personalities that were attracted to her. And then there was often a massive falling out, and
Yeah.
then she would never speak to somebody again. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of drama
Yeah.
going on in
And
my mother's emotional life.
maybe I'm slightly over projecting here, but would you say that there was a challenge for her in maintaining long lasting relationships with people?
Yes, I do. I do. And I think her childhood and growing up not knowing about her birth mother affected her adult relationships. Writing the book, really, I've discovered that there was something fundamental missing in my mother's emotional life, and I
Mm.
think it affected all her adult relationships
Mm.
and her relationship with me. I think she needed mothering. I think she needed mothering, and so did I, actually.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing to recognize.
Yeah. So that was the sad part about it, really. I mean, losing your birth mother as a baby is obviously a terrible, tragic thing for everyone in the family. But I think the most damaging thing for my mother was the conspiracy of silence that grew up around
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So that the people who could have told her all the information she was longing to hear about her birth mother had their reasons to be quiet.
Yeah.
The adoptive mother, Becky, was always fearful that as Sylvia grew up, she would want to be with her real father. So she had her own agenda. Sylvia's father was widowed at a very young age, which was heartbreaking, just in his 20s. But he remarried very, very swiftly, very swiftly. And the second wife did not want any reminders of what had come before her. And
Yeah.
Sylvia was that.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that created distance. And the greater the distance, the better it was for the second wife.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it,
let's start exploring that story then, because what happened with your grandmother, your maternal grandmother, Becky and Jack, and Boy, your maternal grandfather, is fascinating. As you articulated, your maternal grandmother died a matter of days after giving birth to your mother. Um, and Aunt Becky and Jack took her on. But can you just recount the story when Boy came back from the hospital? Because I think this is a really interesting moment and a turning point in in your family history.
I'm glad you pointed that moment out, because I wept when I wrote that,
Yeah.
because it just summed up everything. My mother said that when she was an adult, one of her aunts told her that after her birth mother had died, Boy came to the house where Becky and Jack lived, where all the family had gathered, and put her on a sofa while all the adults in the room decided what was going to happen to the baby, what
Mm,
was the best solution to this
mm.
big, big problem. And that's all she knew. So when I came to write, that image was very vivid in my mind. Becky and Jack didn't have any children of their own, and all the other extended members of the family all had mouths to feed.
Yeah.
None of them had very much money. So it was kind of an obvious thing
Yeah.
that Becky and Jack should step in.
And a gift for them, of course, as family, as a couple who couldn't have their own children.
Yes, absolutely. And Boy was only 20. I mean, the people that I called my grandparents, Becky and Jack, they were actually my great aunt and uncle. But there was all this fluidity and changing of roles, to solve problems, really, especially in the Jewish East End.
Mm,
So at that moment, Becky and Jack both looked at this tiny little baby, but they both had different thoughts in their head. To Becky, this baby was a prized possession, and
mm.
one that she was going to protect from the rest of the world and care
As
for
her own.
as her own. What Jack saw was a tiny human being that he could love and that would love him back. And Jack proved to be one of the heroic husbands that I talked about. Becky turned out to be very domineering, overprotective, but not very motherly. She
Mm.
saw her role as feeding, protecting, clothing, nothing more. That was it. No emotional. All the love came from Jack. But at that moment of handing over the baby to someone else, although we felt great sympathy for him at the time, there was something about Boy's character that came through, that something precious. He was handing over something that belonged to him. And was this the right thing to do? Was he going to be losing out from this?
Yeah.
And then you get to see another side of Boy's character. He had the opportunity to cement a link with his baby daughter by giving her something that belonged to her birth mother.
Yeah. Yeah.
He could have given her Rose's ring,
Yes.
but instead he took it to
The
the
pawn
pawn
shop.
shop
Yeah.
because he had the funeral to pay for.
But one thing that I really felt for with Boy was he hadn't even been married a year by that point. He was madly in love with your maternal grandmother. He loses her. He has a new baby and he's fresh from the hospital and that grief, and then is expected to make these huge decisions, which would be big for any person, let alone a 24-year-old who was dealing with unexpected, heart wrenching grief. So there was a real moment where I felt how much agency did he have in that moment in a room of other adults who perhaps had the confidence to make it sound like they knew best for what was best for him and what was best for the baby.
You're right. But he didn't have any practical
Yeah.
wherewithal to challenge anything.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's absolutely heartrending. But he made some terrible choices after that, which pushed Sylvia away.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
And he was one of the very flawed and weak men in the story that allowed that to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's carry on there then. You talked about a recurring pattern of human behavior as a theme that you identified going back through these generations. Perhaps let's sort of start with Auntie Becky and the parallels that you could see between her nature and your mother.
Yes. Do you know, it's the one thing I remember my mum saying, especially when I was a teenager. Her freedom was really restricted as a young person.
Yeah.
And she always used to say to me, "I'll never be like my Aunt Becky." And I'm sure she meant that.
Hmm.
But, when you're having an argument with your teenage daughter about the clothes they're wearing, whether they can go out when you say you're going to come back, that kind of negotiation, her voice would change and it would be Aunt Becky's voice. And it was
Mm.
really, really uncanny. Her sarcastic tone and put downs would come so readily out of her mouth, even though she was saying that, "Oh, I would never be like my aunt." She couldn't help it. And I don't think you can escape that kind of domineering upbringing without it having some impact on you,
Mm.
however hard you try.
Of
So
course.
it it's it carried on through the
Yeah. Yeah.
generations, and I think a lot of the cleaning obsessions was actually, I can hear my aunt's voice in my head. "Wash that floor again. It's not clean enough. You're hopeless. You don't know how to do this properly." I never lifted a finger to help her with anything in the house because I knew whatever I did wouldn't be good enough. She was one of those people that used to say, "Give it to me, I can do it faster, quicker, better."
Right. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just let
Yeah.
her.
Yeah. And so if we carry that thought down a generation, you articulated that perhaps Becky made your mum feel like things weren't good enough, and you talked about that being a nature of the relationship between you and your mum as well. A life of small disappointments, and never feeling like things were quite good enough.
Yes, as a child, I always felt my mum wanted something from me that I wasn't giving her. I think she wanted a child that was far more demonstrative, "I love you, mummy," and wanting hugs she wanted that from me. But it was very confusing because she didn't show me what to do. She wasn't like that with me, so I didn't know how it was supposed to be. When I was an adult and married with my children, my mum would come and visit, and I'd open the door and she would present the side of her face to me. She would present it like that in expectation of a kiss and a hug. And that's how she was.
Yeah.
So I was never going to be out there doing that, but I haven't been given that as a example.
Your parents weren't affectionate with one another either.
Well, I knew really that my parents were unhappy with each other. There was a lot of tension. You can really pick up when there's tension between the two people that you're traveling with just by a turn of the head. And, she'd roll her eyes and fold her arms and make a hurtful remark. And then, of course, I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I was at home one day with my mum, and I overheard part of a conversation on the phone that she was having with someone else. And I could tell by the way that she was giggling in a very silly way that I'd never heard her do before, that she was talking to a man that's definitely not my dad. And uh, it was a really terrible turning point for me because I was suddenly left with things that I shouldn't know, things that I knew that my dad didn't know. And the worst thing about that was I really didn't understand what to do with the feelings because they were making me very ashamed. They were
Mm.
making me feel that I didn't like my mother very much. And I knew that was a very wrong thing. So I
Mm.
pushed all those feelings down. But of course, as I grew into a teenager, they surfaced again. We had terrible clashes when I was trying to do my own thing and finding my own way. Terrible, hurtful things were said, terrible things that a mother and daughter shouldn't say to each other. But it stemmed back to that moment. And it,
Right.
it was a very hard
Understandably.
lesson.
You wrote in the book something like you loved her and hated her all at once,
Well, love's
which is that sort of
complicated, isn't it?
of
Love is very
course.
complicated. I thought I must
And love
love
and
my
hate are
mum.
closer than sometimes we imagine.
Very much so. You love your mum, but I knew that I didn't like her, and
Mm.
there were times when it was stronger than that. I really felt those emotions. But then, as I say, love is very complicated because when she eventually did leave the house, it was like the regime has fallen.
Mm.
We've got total freedom in this house. There's no ruler anymore.
Mm.
To hell with the cleaning, but it didn't happen like that. I went through a terrible period of mental distress. That's the only way
Mhm.
I can describe it. I was kind of trying to replicate her in some way. At the worst point, I remember spending an afternoon washing the outside walls of the house. I mean, it's just
A
mad.
futile exercise that
Yeah,
a
futile
16-year-old girl
exercise.
shouldn't be worrying about.
Yeah, and I was developing obsessions of my own. I started wearing her clothes. That's what I say. Love is complicated, isn't it?
And looking back now, what do you think that was about for you?
I think I couldn't bear to be without her, but I couldn't stand being with her. That's what it was about. Perhaps there was a lot of guilt about the feelings that I had, and I was somehow trying to make it right by doing the things that I thought might please her or bring me praise.
Yeah.
Although I knew how unhappy my parents were together, the fact that they split was very, very hard for me. Mainly because nobody at any point, any time, asked me how I felt. Nobody. I had no outlet to express that I was angry and upset and sad, and I didn't want this to happen. My parents didn't want to hear that. They
Yeah.
didn't want, it's inconvenient, those emotions.
Yeah. And now knowing what you know about your family history, I don't think that this is exceptional, but your mother had a lack of space to talk about the loss of her mother. This is an example of the patterns that get passed down because those people don't have a skill set, a
No.
vocabulary to be
Mm.
able to have those conversations, or they certainly never had them in their own history.
Yeah.
So they don't have a model for how they would offer it to you as their child.
No, that's true, and I think, 1930s and 40s when my mother was growing up, there was no thought about the psychological impact
Yeah.
of stuff on children.
Yeah. Yeah.
There wasn't that knowledge.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
were intellectual ideas, weren't they?
Yes,
Um,
yeah,
that filtered through to the mainstream much later.
absolutely. And actually, I think much more recently, like very recently. Let's pick up on the process of writing and researching the story because I believe, Ruth, that was part of your healing that gave you some perspective. Can you talk about, yeah, what the process meant to you?
Well, it went in various stages. I started writing down my memories of childhood when my mum died. And I,
Hmm.
I didn't really have any notion of writing a book. It was just
Hmm.
for me to get something out of what I felt. And then I had a good friend at the time who was getting very into genealogy and family history. So I emailed my friend and said, "Do you think you can find something out about my grandma?" She sent me birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates, and I looked at these documents, and people just emerged from the shadows. I suddenly had things that we didn't know anything about. The cause
Mm.
of death, how long Boy and Rose were married before
Mm.
she died, where they lived, what their occupations were, their addresses. It was just incredible. And I
Yeah,
just sat there and thought, This is a story, something that I could shape into a story." I thought, if I tell this story in the right way, it will speak to a lot of people, because what's going
absolutely.
on here is really the difficulties and complexities of family life that is familiar and will be understood by everybody. I had to do lots of research, and that was fascinating. I was just living and breathing it for a good couple of years. I'd dream about it all, and
Yeah. So now that you've gone back in time and discovered more about that family history, has it helped you reflect on your childhood differently?
Oh yeah, compassion, understanding, knowledge. It's helped me make peace with the past, really. Um,
Mhm.
when I started out, I didn't expect that at all. The thing that I'm probably most proud of is that I've given my grandmother a longer life in print than she had on this earth. She was a very humble person in life, and she only had 25 years to make her mark. She was actually a cigarette maker, which I found fascinating in itself. I'm a very small person, and I think you have to have small, dexterous hands to do
Mhm.
that kind of job. I made her a hand roller
Yeah.
because at the time that she would have been a cigarette maker, mechanization was just coming in. There were cigarette factories all around the East End. So I put her there and I imagined her with these small, dexterous hands making cigarettes.
I love that image, having also lived in the East End of London and having spent time in places like Tobacco Docks, which
Yeah.
now are regenerated, gentrified places,
Yes.
and it was lovely to imagine your grandmother there with
Yeah.
two rolls of tobacco on her lap.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing the changes in the East End. One of the most valuable things I did was to interview my dad before he died. I had a little portable cassette player and I interviewed him about his life. When I came to write Where Are the Grown-Ups, I had in his own words how he met my mother, which was invaluable. I think interviewing your relatives while they're alive is really, really valuable.
Mhm,
Taking that time to ask those
mhm.
questions while they're still there. And the other reason why it was such a good thing to do was my mum was so miffed that I was giving all my attention to my dad's history.
Okay.
And it was, what about me? What about my history? She said, "You think you're a journalist? I'll write it myself." So
Oh,
she
so
wrote this.
that's what prompted it.
Yeah. She wrote what she knew and she called it Just for the Record. And she wrote down the things that she knew and the things that she didn't, and her attitudes. So that was absolutely invaluable too. So if you don't talk to your relatives while they're alive and get their story, get them to write something down for you.
Mm,
And you
I
never
was just
know,
gonna
it could make a book.
and how has writing helped you reflect on your mother?
I couldn't have written this book while she was alive because I couldn't have written it in this way. It's quite brutal. It's quite honest. That's what most people say they like about it. Actually, I'm not sure I could have been that honest with while she was
Yeah,
alive. But I
yeah.
really wished I could have shown her the information that nobody else could give her. I'm much more forgiving. I'm much more understanding. She couldn't help the way she was brought up, and
Mm,
the tragedy of her mother dying was one thing, but then the secrecy around the whole situation. It everything could have been different if she'd known, a little more
mm,
when she needed to, when she was a young woman herself. And I think for anyone reflecting on how to break the cycles of the past, I think it's quite significant that I've had two sons. I did worry that if I had a daughter, I might repeat the Becky, Sylvia type thing and be
mm,
too critical. And I feel having two sons has broken that
that's interesting.
spell, if you like.
Yeah,
But from the people, we're all flawed, aren't we? We are all flawed.
we're all work in progress.
We are growing up, yeah, in front of our children, absolutely, and working it all out in front of them. And the best you can do is to recognize your flaws, understand where your emotions are coming from,
Mm,
and you won't always be successful, but most of the time you'll be good enough. You really will. And that's all I can say, really, that
mm.
none of us are perfect, complete creations.
And that goes for being human, not just being parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I find the really and the beautiful parallel that your mother took the time to sit and write it and talk about how she felt. And maybe at a different time and age, she, like you, would have ended up as a writer. Maybe there was something else that you both shared that you never had the chance to understand.
Yeah, she definitely had a way with words.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's lots of things she used to say that I find myself saying,
Mm,
nice things.
mm.
My kids said, "Oh yeah, grandma used to say that."
And how do you
So
feel when they say that?
I feel nice now.
Good.
I feel nice about it now. I wouldn't like them to think it in a bad way, you know. Grandma used to tell me off like that. I don't
Mhm.
want to be tarred with that brush, but you know, we none of us are perfect, and
Mm.
we're gonna do things wrong from time to time. But it's, you know, as I said in the book, it's never too late to say sorry.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that I think is the thing that I would like to share with everybody else who's interested in this podcast.
Yeah.
That whatever happens, it's never too late to say sorry.
Okay, well, that brings me to 2 final questions then about your mother before I close. 1, did she ever take accountability for having been unfaithful to your father and leaving you?
She did she did actually say that she found it much harder to leave than I gave her credit for, because I have a brother who's 9 years younger than me. So when she left, he was, you know, he was only about 10 or 11, and she said she really struggled with that. So
That
accountability, well, she did talk about my dad. This was a bit awkward. She tried to explain it wasn't very good in the bedroom. But, you know, can you say anything?
No, again, not the conversation that you wanna be having with a parent, even if you have a
No.
good relationship.
So, you know, obviously, but do you know what? When I think back now on the back
Mm,
seat, somebody
mm,
hadn't performed the night before.
mm,
Do you know what I mean? There
mm.
was that feeling. Now I'm an adult, of course, and been happily married for 45 years. That's, you know, I've broken that cycle. I've been, yeah, broken that cycle.
Congratulations to you and Tim.
Thank you. Thank you.
But that sounds very different to accountability. And the reason I ask is that I think that mothers can play a victim in their own lives. And it sounds like those conversations you had with her are still more about trying to get you to understand her perspective
Yeah.
than her
Yeah.
really accepting the hurt that
Mm.
it meant for you and your brother.
I tried, but you know, then that's kind of quite hurtful to her.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
no, she didn't. No, is the answer to your question really. It
yeah.
was always, it's all about me
Mhm.
and the victim. Yeah, she said she had the attitude all the time of poor me, and it wasn't her fault. She had needs that weren't being met, all
Yeah,
sorts of emotional needs that weren't being
yeah,
met, which my stepfather could give her.
yeah. And credit and sympathy to you as a young girl and a teenage girl and then as an adult woman for being magnanimous enough to recognize what she needed in that moment and putting her emotional welfare ahead of your own.
Well, I can do that now. I didn't do it at the time.
Yeah.
No, I didn't do it at the time. I was pretty obstructive actually. Stroppy teenager. I'm just not going to behave in the way the adults are demanding I behave.
With the benefit of hindsight and having had your own children, how normal do you think your upbringing was?
It was normal and lovely in one way. I had lots of material things and I was comfortable. We were well fed, thanks to my dad, who was a chef. But in other ways, it felt very restrictive. And the only way I can compare is how we brought up our two sons. Now, my
Mhm.
eldest son, this is probably a good example. As a child, he was an extremely talented artist, and he is an artist and a designer now, but this talent was from an early age. And I have to say that I am my mother's daughter in that I do like a clean environment, and
Okay.
I can't work in chaos, but I never wanted it to get to the stage where it would stifle family life in the way it stifled life when I was growing up. So, you know, the universe sent me an artist as a child,
Mhm.
right? Now, they like to experiment, don't they, with paint and all manner of messy projects. So that helped me get the cleaning in perspective. And we obviously had our moments when he was an art student. He was doing a project that involved broken glass, and there was
Right.
piles of broken glass in every room in the house, and I nearly went doolally. But you know, growing up as a child, I wanted him to be able to do his thing.
So would you
And
say there you were able to put his happiness ahead of your own impulse for
well, his
order and
needs really, I could see that it would have been cruel and unjust to stop him doing stuff like that. And I used to laugh about it. I used to say to him,
right.
you know, grandma would never have let me throw paint around and pin things to the walls. And he used to laugh. Yeah, well, that's grandma. But he
Yeah.
had no clue what it would have been
What was
like.
actually going on inside you at that time?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was quite hard for me, but I think I've tried to get it in perspective. Well, that it is me a bit, but I don't try and let it rule my life. I try
Certainly.
not to anyway. I
Mhm.
put it in a box. It comes out of the box when it needs to, sort of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, you try and take the round the edges off it, and a healthy dose of humor to help you on that
Yeah, that
way.
that does help. Actually, although some of the things I describe in the book are quite sad and heartrending, I did try and lighten the load. People tell me that there are a few humorous episodes where I make fun of myself. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what do you think is the one universal lesson that people can take from your family story?
encourage people to talk about their feelings. I think it's obviously some things are very difficult, but if you can be open and honest with each other, it helps. I wouldn't say I've always been open and honest. There are many areas in my life where I've got a closed mind, but I think in family relationships, if you can find a way to be honest with each other and acknowledge each other's feelings, I think it's really helpful.
Couldn't agree more. It sounds very simple. It's not easy to do, but I definitely think that it's impactful. Okay, well, that's a beautiful note to finish on. Is there anything else that we haven't covered, Ruth, that you would like to share?
Really only if anyone is interested in the book. It is available in several formats. It's in paperback, it's in ebook format, and it's also in audiobook format. And I've narrated my
Oh,
audiobook. So
beautiful.
if you fancy hearing more of my voice, it's available in audio.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. Yeah, and we will include a link to the book and then we'll have a reading list on the Normal Family page. So we'll include it in there as well if followers want to go and find more.
I'm always keen to hear reader comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ruth, I think that you've written a book that first and foremost is entertaining and engaging. As I said, a really interesting look back on East End London and what it was like living in those communities. But of course, I would say this would night some really beautiful lessons around being able to step back and see family members as individuals, not just the roles that they played in our life, and how in
Absolutely, yeah.
turn individuals in their lives have impacted the people that they became and having a bit of compassion and love and understanding for that.
We're only human, aren't we, after all?
We're only human, we're only work in progress.
Thank you, Ruth, for talking to me and sharing your story. You can find a link to Ruth's books and others recommended by a Normal Family in the show notes below. And please keep watching for more unfiltered families and get in touch if you think that you have a story to share.